Well, good morning, everyone. When Chris set out the overview and the lineup for the study of Jeremiah, a few of us volunteered to lead a class. And once slated for a class, Julie and I quickly agreed that we needed to buy the book, a commentary on Jeremiah. So we did get that. And then Chris provided us an outline for each class, which included the chapters and verses that we would center our class on. And I have to admit, when I first looked at the list, I thought my class was based on the chapter called A Hard Message to Stubborn Jerusalem, which covered Jeremiah chapters 11, verse 18, to chapter 20, verse 18, and included 75 pages from the Brueggemann book, which I did read. Whereas today's class is based on a chapter entitled The Covenant Broken, which covers Jeremiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 17, which is richly enhanced by 4 pages out of the Brueggemann book. I give this to you as a background because I want to share this with you. Each chapter of the book includes a brief introduction to the verses that each section will be on. And so when I initially read the chapter, A Hard Message to Stubborn Jerusalem, the first 2 sentences read like this: these chapters of Jeremiah contain rich and diffuse materials. Beyond the identification of recurring themes and motifs, it's extremely difficult. At which point I said to myself, just what I need, extremely difficult. Thankfully, this was not the case. And this morning's class is limited to chapter 11, verses 1 to 17. The brief introduction to this chapter reads this way. This prose passage contains a formal, highly stylized statement of covenant theology. Covenant theology is important to remember as we go through the class. Before we begin, I'd like to share with you an occasion that at times I can muster up idle time. Some years ago, I was working on a project with a firm in New York, and we were headed to a 2-day meeting. And I realized that we weren't sufficiently prepared. So we spent the first day talking about everybody else's work so that we could hone our presentation for the next day. So if idle time doesn't use all of this morning, Julie will pick up where she left off last week. The first thing that I just want to turn your attention to is to the commentary of Brueggemann. Brueggemann talks about 3 scholars. He talks about William Holiday, Robert Carroll, and William McCain. William Holiday tried to present a direct and concrete connection between the text of Jeremiah and specific historical occurrences. According to Brueggemann, this connection could not be achieved, and other scholars feel just the same. Robert Carroll had a counter perspective, and his perspective was to distance the text of Jeremiah from any recoverable connection. The alternate that Carroll presented was that the book was an ideological interpretation of social values and the interest of the times. Whereas William McCain pays particular attention to the development of Jeremiah over time and suggests that the book is an ongoing development upon generations. I think Walter Brueggemann is trying to point out that the book of Jeremiah is not a record of what happened, but rather a constructive proposal of reality that's powered by passionate connection that is voiced in an artistic form. I think it's safe to say that Judah fell. The question may be, why did it fall? Was it due to the actions of the Israelites, or perhaps was there another reason? We have spent a fair amount of time on how the Israelites disobeyed God and therefore had their destruction coming to them. Should we surmise that bad things happen to bad people and the fall was justified? Or should we fall back on the cry, why does bad things happen to good people and why do good things happen to bad people? The book of Jeremiah is a reflective and responsive to the historical crisis of the last days of Judah, culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in 587 BC. The Judean crisis was a result of the Babylonians moving in on Judah to undo the political double-mindedness of the people. The people of Judah vacillated between Babylon and the Egyptian alliances. Further, there was intense rivalry between the communities in Jerusalem and Babylon, as one of the king's sons was exiled in Babylon, whereas the second one remained in Judah. Therefore, is it possible that Judah will have fallen even if the people were obedient? And I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts or reactions to that. Okay, then we'll just.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, please.
Interesting question. I mean, I think Jeremiah would say no. You know, that God is so sovereign that despite what was happening in the geopolitical world, that he could have kept Judah safe from the onslaught of Babylon. But, I mean, there was a lot going on, and Babylon was a very powerful force to be reckoned with. So,
Yeah, that was the sense that I got when I was reading this. And, you know, part of the sense that I got was, in some ways, Judah was like the making good neighbors. And Judah was the fence. Judah was the fence between Egypt and Babylon. And sometimes you need that, shall we say, to have good neighbors. So reverting back to the concept of covenant theology, Brueggemann questions whether the tradition of Jeremiah is an ideological view that seeks to authorize a version of reality, whether the Deuteronomic ideology found in Jeremiah is Torah-based and therefore explains the crisis of a Torah disregard. In contrast to ideology, Brueggemann questions whether a canonical interpretation of the text is a positive theological effect. Positive in that God is seriously taken and that the book of Jeremiah is arranged in a way to show the goodness of God. I think Brueggemann concludes that it doesn't matter whether the book is canonical or ideological, rather that the book of Jeremiah does not belong to the scholars, it belongs to the people. The purpose of the book is to address all who would listen. It dares to reflect on the ground of disruption, on the practice of survival in the midst of destruction, and on the possibilities beyond destruction. It's a notion that holiness is at work in our barbaric setting. Again, the tradition of Jeremiah proceeds on the theological perspective. The governing principle in Israel's covenant with Yahweh is found in the memories and mandates of the Zion tradition. The covenant taught that the sovereign God of Israel required obedience to covenant stipulations about social practice. Disobedience would result in heavy sanctions, including death and displacement. So let's talk a little bit about God's covenant with Moses. God made his covenant at Mount Sinai through Moses. It is found in detail in the chapters of Exodus. Israelites were to follow the statutes of holy living by adhering to some 613 laws and instructions, including the observation of mandated holy feasts at appointed time. This mission was to be God's witnesses and servants in the world and to glorify God. We read in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10, "You are my witness, declared the Lord, and my servant who I have chosen, so that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me, no God was formed, nor will there be one after me." In Isaiah 49, verse 3, he said to me, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I display my splendor." So the Israelites were to teach the world about God and God's goodness. Most importantly, Israel was to give birth to a male who would reconcile man to God. So let's look at the Exodus, chapter 19, verses 5 to 8. And it reads this way. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So Moses went back and summoned the elders to the people and set them before the words that the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together. We will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought back their answer to the Lord. So let's look a little bit at the fine print that's found in this covenant between Moses and the people. There are the blessings for obedience and then the curses for disobedience. And so I just want to read a few of them just to give you a sense of some of them, and I trust many of you know them completely. But let me just read a few. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. This is just another one. They're a little bit out of sequence. The Lord will send a blessing on your barns and on everything you put your hand to. The Lord your God will bless you in the land he has given you. The Lord will establish you as holy people, as he promised you on oath. If you keep the commands of the Lord your God and walk in obedience to him, then all the peoples on earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you. Just a few more. The Lord will grant you abundant prosperity in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock, and the crops of your ground, in the land he swore to your ancestors to give you. The Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will always be on top, never at the bottom. Do not turn aside from any of the commands that I give you today, to the right or to the left, following only God's and serving them. So what do you think? If Israel had been obedient and received these blessings, does this feel a little bit like a wealth and prosperity gospel? Why and why not? Aaron?
Well, they worked for a while. When they first got in there, they obeyed God, they had festivals, and they did well. And then they started to turn away and they didn't work. So it's God keeping his word. It's not saying that everything's going to be fantastic, because there were still poor people in Jerusalem and in Israel. Mm-hmm. But he blessed them as a nation, okay, until they turned away as a nation. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anna?
Well, I think you could interpret it that it was a little bit, possibly, but part of what he's saying is that he blessed the nation as a whole, but you still have the problems of humanity. And exactly what they were back then, I don't know, but we still are going to have problems. And then some people feel like, well, this doesn't work, I'm not getting anything I want, and things aren't going well, but it doesn't, being a Christian doesn't exempt you from ordinary life and living in the world. Things are not and
yeah, I'm just sharing how it struck me, just for the record. I'm reading and I'm saying prosperity, abundance, yeah, all will be great if you obey me, and it just kind of caught me. But yeah, get it, please.
Like the dietary laws also protected their health at a time when they didn't have reason to do things like that.
Sure. Yeah, and for the record, I handpicked a few of these verses, so just for the record. But Chris?
Oh, I was gonna say, it does feel like So you do find this kind of blessing that seems conditional and based on merit to some degree. And you also find blessings like Genesis 12, where God tells Abram, I will bless you and I will make you a blessing. That seems unconditional in the sense that there wasn't necessarily something about Abram. You know, he hadn't necessarily ticked off all boxes beforehand when this blessing comes to him. So it seems like it's both and.
Yeah, fair enough. As I say, these are handpicked verses. Anybody else? We could keep going. Go ahead, Kathy, please.
Yeah, it does, obviously, it does brush up against the wealth and prosperity gospel type thing. That's where, you know, where the two almost overlap, and wealth and prosperity gospel kind of pushes one piece of it, you know. But the piece that mostly pushes the wealth and prosperity is the individual wealth and individual this. You individually do well, and then you, whereas the covenant was with a people and the way a community did, and they realized that within the community, some people will do better, some people will do worse, given whatever. And then over time, we were supposed to even it out and work it out, but it was a more of a communal type of way, you know, to live together versus just, you know, God. And the prosperity gospel, so I've listened to it, mostly it's like, God wants you to do well. There's not even too much of a give and take, really. It's like, give money and do well.
And I guess the people had to separate which way it was okay, that this one did well and this one didn't. Because it was for the whole nation and they needed to separate that out.
It's for the whole, for the group.
Sure, okay. Anything else on that? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the curses for disobedience. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees that I give you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke, and everything you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him. The Lord will plague you with diseases until he has destroyed you from the land and you are entering. Destroyed you from the land you are entering to possess. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever, inflammation, with scorching, heat, drought, blight, mildew, which will plague you until you perish. Just a few more. You will sow much seed in the field, but you will harvest little, but locusts will devour it. You will plant vineyards and cultivate them, but you will not drink the wine and gather the grapes, because the worms will eat them. You will have the olive trees throughout your country, but you will not use the olive. You'll not lose the oil, because the olives will drop off. You will have sons and daughters, but you will not keep them, because they will go into captivity. Swarms of locusts will take over all your trees and the crops of your land. Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end to the other. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your ancestors have known. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your feet. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and despairing heart. You will live in constant suspense, both day and night, never sure of your life. I have to tell you, when I read this stuff, I was like, this is tough stuff. So, you know, I just trying to make sense of it. I'm just trying to really make sense of it. Again, you get all the upside of the obedience in this. Listen, I hope it's to say a horrific consequence of disobedience. But go ahead, Julie.
Well, I was going to say, and you know, for many years I read the Bible sequentially like this, and I thought, you know, Moses is telling them so early that this is all going to happen. Of course, it was written down after it happened, which kind of means that, you know, kind of, you can see how that would have tainted how it's written. Which just struck me down. I mean, it's just made me go, my goodness, I've been reading the Bible thinking all this stuff is, you know, sequential. And always really thinking, oh my gosh, this was promised from day one. that they would be, that they would go into captivity. And it's hard to imagine that from that perspective, but it's just important to know that it was written after it happened.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Anyone else? There is some good in here, so just bear with me. I'm not sure if it's important to point out or not, but as I understand it, the word covenant in the Old Testament is traditional translation of the Hebrew word bereth. Bereth does not, however, mean a two-sided contract between equal partners, but a one-sided commitment and stipulation whereby the powerful Lord enters a self-imposed obligation. On the other hand, obligations are imposed by the passive recipient. So when you consider that the people who were commanded to be perfectly obey God, and if they had sinful natures, whether or not it was possible for them to keep the demands of the Mosaic covenant, for they came into it already possessing sinful natures. No sooner had they entered the covenant with God did they immediately break it. In my preparation for this morning's class, I came across two forms of covenant tradition. Oh, let's go back. Sorry. Hold on. Just give me a moment. Getting ahead of myself. There you go. Okay. Sure. Sorry. Julie, maybe just leave it alone. Okay. I'm gonna leave it like that if that's okay. Can you guys see, can everyone see that okay? Let me see if I can just do it. If I can't, we'll just stay with it. Okay, there you go. There you go. And I'm just sharing with you some stuff that I just, wandered through in terms of trying to prepare for today's class. And I think I began by saying, doing my best to play some sense out of this. So in my preparation for this morning's class, I came to two forms of the covenant tradition in the New Testament. Personally, I can't attest to these traditions, and I just can't back them up one way or the other, but they struck me as maybe something to at least mention. On the one hand is the Mark-Matthew tradition, and on the other is what's referred to the Paul-Luke tradition. Two traditions I've heard nothing about, so I'm sharing it with you. Both traditions converge on a point where they establish a link between the covenant and the representative self-sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. The Mark-Matthew tradition speaks of the blood of the covenant. In Mark 14, verse 2 reads, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." Matthew 26, verse 28 reads, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins," and thereby interprets the Lord's Supper event in the sense of the priestly tradition of the blood of the covenant that was shed at Sinai. Similar to the verse found in Exodus 24, verse 8, which reads, "Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people and said, 'This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words.'" The Paul-Luke tradition speaks of the new covenant in my blood. In Luke chapter 22, verse 20 reads, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." And then Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25 reads, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink in the remembrance of me." By employing the blood symbolism, they at the same time take up the promise of a new covenant, which is found in Jeremiah verses 31 to 32. "The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made for their forefathers when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant." Thus, the Lord's Supper narratives and the covenant theology is a continuum with the Old Testament. Regardless where you stand on these points, what's missing in the Deuteronomic theology is the sympathy of God, the pathos. God is more complex than a simple retribution of the life of Judah. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which covenant provides further divine assurance that God will realize his purpose for creation in general and humanity in particular by fully establishing his kingdom on earth. Any thoughts or reactions to any of that? Has anyone heard of those traditions before? Do they carry any weight? Anna?
I mean, it's the new covenant brought by Jesus. I didn't see a big difference.
Mhm.
In the Matthew and Mark didn't have mentioning of the cup,
Mhm.
but ultimately Jesus sacrificed himself, his blood,
Mhm.
to establish the new covenant that we enjoy.
Okay.
Um,
Adam? Andrew? I'm sorry, Aaron? I'm sorry.
You there.
I'm thinking ahead, so go ahead, please. No, please, go ahead.
Well, the main difference between the Torah, the covenants in Torah and the covenants in the New Testament are the fact that the blood donation is voluntary. The sheep that were slaughtered for Moses to sprinkle the blood on the people in the desert, that sheep did not volunteer for that duty. It wasn't like, hey, I'll go, you know. But Jesus volunteers. He's going to shed his blood for the forgiveness of everyone's sins. So this is the New Testament covenant is a more personal relationship where God is sacrificing something in order to restore our relationship, as opposed to the Old Testament where you had to kill an animal to get.
So would you say that there's a continuum between the Old and the New Testament then?
Yeah, and it's a more intimate.
Okay. Listen, I would tend to agree with that there is a continuum. I maybe would ask others if they see it the same way.
There's a definite continuum, I think, between the two. And also on the opposite side, I mean, even Paul addresses, since you have this covenant that covers you for forgiveness of sins, do you then just get to sin all the time because you're covered with the blood? And the answer to that is no.
Sure.
But it's, in the same way that the old covenant, you still didn't get to, you may for centuries turn your back on God, but eventually it didn't go well, or eventually it's a consequence of it. So in that way, they are some there's.
I mean, how do we feel about the fact that the Israelites, had sin on them to begin with? And how is it possible for them to keep the covenant? Go ahead, Anna, please. This is for dialogue,
It probably wasn't, but I would guess that a covenant between master and servant didn't offer that many benefits. And I think God knew their hearts. And he would have known if they were making a sincere effort. And I think he would have allowed that. But they became so blatant, it couldn't be ignored or made an excuse for it.
So maybe it wasn't as rigid as Exodus points it out to be.
I mean, it was a more rigid world, I think, in terms of they needed to be kept separate from these other gods. And so it was more, it was more barbaric because it was a barbaric world.
Okay.
And when somebody saw a blatant transgression, there had to be a blatant punishment. So everybody would know why.
I think there's good underlying truth in Jeremiah, but again, I'm really reflecting upon reading Jeremiah, and at least for me, it was pretty hard to read. It was difficult, and it was almost difficult to come to terms with what was being said. I just was particularly challenged by that, and So I just am wondering out loud about it.
Can I make one more comment about?
Yeah, sure.
sin? You know, I feel like we often level sin. Any sin is as great as any other sin. We've all sinned, and there's a lot of truth in that. You know? So that you're not better than somebody else, right? But there's a difference between missing the mark of perfection, trying and failing to do that, and going in the complete wrong direction and not turning back and not trying. There's just a difference.
Right.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
I think we all
Sure.
feel that.
Yeah. See, I took more of a rigid reading of it,
Mhm.
and that's probably why I came away with that type of a feeling. But I do recognize what you're trying to say, and Julie.
I was gonna say, I think it isn't as rigid as it sounds, and, you know, really speaks to what Kathy's saying here, that there's the going in the right direction that we're in the commandments.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like there's, you know, any, like it is totally rigid,
Yeah,
but I think
Sure.
there was, I mean, at least we know God in that way.
Okay. The verses that spoke to the covenant broken are again in chapter 17, 1-17. And I think I'll read them. And then maybe we could just listen to them and see what we hear. Okay. I don't have a slide for it, so please just listen to them. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Listen to the terms of this covenant and tell them to the people of Judah and to those who live in Jerusalem. Tell them that this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Cursed is the one who does not obey the terms of this covenant. The terms I command your ancestors when I brought them out of Egypt, out of the iron smelting furnace. I said, obey me and do everything I command you, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. Then I will fulfill the oath I swore to your ancestors, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, the land you possess today. I answered, Amen, Lord. The Lord said to me, proclaim all these words in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. Listen to the terms of the covenant and follow them. From the time I brought your ancestors up from Egypt until today, I warned them again and again, saying, obey me, but they will not listen or pay attention. Instead, they followed the stubbornness of their evil hearts. So I brought on them all the curses of the covenant I had commanded them to follow, but they did not keep. Then the Lord said to me, there is a conspiracy among the people of Judah and those who live in Jerusalem. They have returned to the sins of their ancestors who refused to listen to my words. They followed other gods to serve them. Both Israel and Judah have broken the covenant I made with their ancestors. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape. Although they cry out to me, I will not listen to them. The towns of Judah and the people of Jerusalem will go and cry out to the gods to whom they burn incense, but they will not help them at all when the disaster strikes. You, Judah, have so many gods as you have towns, and the altars you have set up to burn incense to the shameful god Baal, or as many as the streets in Jerusalem. Do not pray for these people or offer them any plea or petition for them, because I will not listen when they call me in the time of their distress. What is my beloved doing in my temple, as she with many others works out evil schemes? Can concentrated meat avert your punishment? When you engage in your wickedness, then rejoice. The Lord called you a thriving olive tree with fruit beautiful in form. But the roar of a mighty storm, he will set it on fire, and its branches will be burned. Then the Lord Almighty, who planted you, has decreed disaster for you, because the people of both Israel and Judah have done evil and aroused my anger by burning incense to Baal. Again, if you cherry pick some of the verses out of that, it's just a tough one to come away with. And so what I'm really hoping is that we all agree that the book of Jeremiah is complicated. It could be challenging. However, it's significant in that it's integrated in God's story for us, which ultimately is God's desire to have his children near him and his yearning for a loving relationship. That's pretty much what I have for this morning, but we could open it up for any dialogue. Sure.
I always try to, whenever I'm listening to the class, how does it apply to my life?
Mhm.
What can I learn from it? And as we were reading all this and the distraction and the covenant and what, I kept thinking of how in my own life, when I devote the time to listen to God's will, whatever that might be, my day is just perfect. I mean, absolutely doesn't matter what happens. And when I refuse, which means I run on what I want to do, my own selfish way,
Mhm.
doesn't matter how perfect on the outside the world looks like, inside I am in the turmoil. And that's what I was looking for, that distraction and all this what we were reading. That's what happened to my soul
Mm.
when I don't really follow God's word and this loving relationship, when I disobey and try to do what my selfish ego wants me to do, okay? And it's uncanny how that happens. So that's what I took it up.
And so we have the gift to repent and to
Yeah,
move forward,
yeah,
right?
yes.
Okay. Anything else? Sure, Anna, please.
I don't know, probably most people have heard this saying before, but I think, and this goes right along with what Eva just said. When it comes right down to it, sometimes I just think of it as your life just goes so much better when you follow the manufacturer's instructions. Like God knows ultimately what we really need. We may not really want it. We are like our children. And as parents, that's the function of parents. The child doesn't understand that what they want at that moment might really hurt them. But the parents do, and they have to stop them. Lots of things. But and even in the beginning, when you choose, that relationship with God and following His word, well, all the laws, maybe they couldn't, probably nobody could, but just having a relationship can bring you so much peace and contentment, whether you're the king or nobleman or a simple serf or servant, whatever. And that's been the case for me. I have not achieved it, but that's my goal.
Okay. I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. I think we might be at a point where we're ready for prayer. Yeah.
Gracious God, I come before you with various requests, various things in my heart. Deborah and Robert's cousin Patty had a fall on her ribs. We pray for healing for her. Deborah's client suffering from a fall, from dementia. And Aaron's friend Tom having surgery after a heart procedure, and now facing more surgery. His wife Tabitha, and Anna's gratitude to you, O Lord, for cortisone shots. How it's helped one knee, and she looks forward to helping the other one. We continue to pray for Jade, who longs for recovery. Continue to ask for the watch over the poor suffering people in Ukraine, and the poor suffering Russians, both suffering from leadership that's ill-advised and violence prone. We ask you to deliver them from that kind of leadership and bring into warfare and violence here. We come into our own election season. Give us peace of mind to live throughout it, perhaps clarity, but more than anything, a deep sense of trust in you. We now come to worship, open our hearts and our minds to you. so that that can be the great hour to those with faith, those with your spirit, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Art.
Say,